actually are harmed by what you give them. And I can actually give you some examples of this. For instance, scared straight programs, right? What a failure for kids who are at higher risk, right? You get a kid at higher risk, you put them in a scared straight program, and they go, that's a bad jail, I could have that. You think that jail's bad? You should see what kind of shit I live with my family. The crappy room and the cold conditions that I live in. This, you call this a punishment? Higher risk kids do not necessarily benefit from those programs. You take a nice, kind of safe, insecure, middle-class kid with no challenges or anything else, who's not marginalized, not experiencing any real challenge, and you run them through that system, they go, oh my God, this is really horrific. What do you mean I don't have a gaming system, I can't decide my own bedtime? It's a completely different experience, right? And in fact, if I even go further with this, I just wanted to add a little bit of science, a little more gutsy sciences. This is from a edited issue of Child Abuse and Neglect, or as a guest editor just recently. And what's interesting is, in this study, what they found was they looked at children who were experienced abuse, physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, violence, all this kind of stuff. And they looked at these kids over time, and these are kids in mentored groups. You know what I mean? Places where they meet an adult to mentor them. It could be in a religious organization, it could be a Boys and Girls Club, it could be a choir in the community, it could be anything, right? Where there's an adult, a solid adult presence to these kids. Now, you tell me, are those groups good for kids who've been abused or not? Generally speaking, by show of hands, good for kids? Generally? Yeah, generally. Well, guess what though? It depends though a little bit on the profile of the kid. What this study, and this pattern, if you go looking for it, you begin to find it. What they actually found was that for kids who had been neglected, when you put them into these mentored groups, guess what? No problem at all. They actually, over time, decrease their depression. The number of depressive symptoms that they show. That's exactly what we want, right? It's good. But the children who had been sexually abused actually became more depressed. In other words, your intervention harmed the children who had been sexually victimized by putting them into a mentorship group. Now, lest you think that that's a one-off, when you looked at the same group of kids over time for delinquency, what Kwok and his colleagues found was that actually the sexually abused children decreased their delinquency. They may be more depressed, but they were less delinquent. And the children who were neglected actually increased their delinquency by being in these mentorship groups. Maybe because they felt more secure, maybe they felt less depressed, now they had more energy to break the law, I don't know, but something was kind of up. And we see consistently that when you begin to understand these patterns, you begin to sort of understand the difficulties we have in predicting the impact of a particular intervention. So let me just keep, there's another pattern here, if you can follow me. I hope I'm not losing you quite yet. But can you imagine a situation where a child at sort of lesser exposure to risk is given an intervention, and they actually are harmed by it, but you give the same intervention to a child at more risk, and they whoosh upwards. They actually do much better. They're the B on the graph. Let me tell you a story that kind of tweaked my mind to this. I had knee surgery about 1.5 years ago. And great surgeon, wonderful guy, perfect, healthy, whatever. But when I woke up in the OR, after the post-op sort of thing, he left me a nice little jar, a bottle of 20 of a very strong opioid, I guess, right? I forget exactly what it was, whatever. Very, very powerful opioid that he left me. And you might know that there's a lot of problems with opioids out there these days. And I was amazed that he had never asked me, before he prescribed those 20 pills, he never asked me if I had an addiction problem. Nowhere in the assessment. And can you imagine, and this is actually how we know many people fall into it, right? They're in pain post-op, they start taking the medication, and that becomes sort of a pathway into eventual addiction. So basically, I took one of the pills, I didn't particularly like the effect of it, I realized I could probably medicate with just simple Tylenol and everything else. I mean, if you're not used to that stuff and you're not sort of inclined toward it, it's a really awful feeling when you put that stuff into you. So, by the way, I have 19 left over, I'm thinking about selling them later. No, joking. But Like, something that's positive for one person could be negative for another. So when I think about a few examples of this, let me give you a couple of examples. For instance, divorce. Is divorce negative or positive? Depends. You guys know this, right? It depends on the nature of the risk factors that people are experiencing and the level of violence. I mean, if a kid's in a really happy family and everyone's gung-ho and it's all great, and his parents, guess what, we're divorcing, it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Versus a child who knows, well, it took you guys long enough. Right? Referrals for counseling, by the way, don't forget they're not benign. If you refer a kid who really isn't really isn't having significant mental health problems, and you refer them to counseling, you can actually do harm to them. But by the way, any of you ever open up a DSM-5, you just start flipping through and you realize that you are more screwed up than you ever thought you were. Right? It's a little bit of that phenomenon, right? And of course, the other one, of course, is parentification, which should be of concern to you. Is parentification good or bad for kids? Well, actually, the science is rather split on this. Some of the work that we've published, and I've worked with colleagues around the world looking at this, if you're in a parentified situation where the child, say a 10-year-old, is being asked to come home and cook and clean and look after the parent who has a major mental depressive disorder or something like that, right? If that child knows that that parent is actually debilitated and needs the child to function well, and the child receives the affirmation from an extended family member or neighbor, the child does not necessarily experience that as bad. And in fact, what is bad sometimes is when we take that experience away from them and make them into a child. And the kid goes, well, no, I was actually helping my family survive. I was actually contributing, and then you've made me into a kid again. I liked my role. Thank you very much. But you contrast that with a kid in a nice, safe, secure household, and they're being parentified. I was thinking, if my partner and I was at home, and she just didn't decide to do anything, and I just didn't decide to do anything. We sit on the couch, and we still have a 15-year-old at home, and we say to our 15-year-old tonight, well, you cook dinner, you clean the house, we're just gonna get me a drink now. We kind of did that to our 15-year-old. That 15-year-old go, you guys are perfectly capable of doing this. What gives? This is kind of really weird. I don't like this, right? That's a completely different situation than the child who's helping their parent, and they have this great grandmother. The grandmother comes in and goes, you are a good child. They always speak in Italian. I mean, grandmother's like, you are a good child. You're helping. You're helping this person. You're helping them. You're helping your mother. You're a good kid, right? And you pinch the cheek. Like that is such a different dynamic. And lest you think, I just want to sort of add one more because I think this is such an important implication for the work that you're all doing. This is some other data that we have on youth from the East Coast, and these were a lot of young people using services as well. And what we actually found was what we were looking at was also risky behaviors, drug use, conduct, breaking things out in the community, vandalism, and all that kind of stuff, right? And what we kind of found was, I just want to show you this line. As you increase a child's resilience, in other words, that you score higher on self-efficacy, self-esteem, you give them a sense of perseverance, you enrich their world, they have friends that dote on them, they feel connected to their culture and everything else, right? And if they're growing up in a dangerous community or a community that's challenging them, and you increase their resilience, no surprise, their risk behaviors go down, which is exactly what we would expect. But in our study, we got this clue that we should look at the data again and extract the kids who come from really good neighborhoods, safe communities, low graffiti, places that seem to be functioning well, safety, etc. And what we found was that those kids, as their resilience scores went up, they actually reported more risky behaviors. Now, we thought maybe that's just an anomaly, so then we looked at school engagement. And again, the kids who came out of the more dangerous, difficult, challenging environments, as their resilience went up, they tended to go to school more. And no surprise, as the kids who came out of the more well-functioning, less stressed environments, as their resilience scores went up, they actually showed a decline in school engagement. Now I'm telling you this because you help kids find the resources that they need, right? And my argument here is you really do have to think about the context that someone is getting before you give them a service. In other words, what happens if you imagine you give a kid from a really safe, secure environment, and then you flood them with self-esteem, empower the crap out of them, make them feel special, put them on activities, encourage them to kind of have total say over everything. You create nothing more than a narcissistic little shit who is probably not going to perform very well. I'm always amazed. I do write on this kind of overprotective parent. This overprotective parenting stuff. We're just creating a huge spike in anxiety disorders amongst our children. Go watch 5-year-olds play soccer, and you go down and you watch the parents. Why they're watching their 5-year-olds at a practice, I haven't a clue. But they should be off having a coffee or something. But they're watching their 5-year-olds, and my daughter used to coach this, and I'd watch this. I'd be over there just kind of before picking her up from wherever she was. And a little 5-year-old would, kick the ball. Nothing big. And the parents would be in the stand doing it the way, woo, that was amazing, you won the ball. No, you aren't. You really aren't harmful. You really aren't harmful. That was just a kick. No need to be excited. It's really not exciting. Go away. Just get out of this kid's life, please. You're really doing harm. And there is a little bit of that, right? But versus the child who really has nobody ever applauding him. That child needs that way. Thus, I guess what I'm leaving you here, as I'm kind of bring this around, what I'm saying is, we need to help children navigate and negotiate for what they need. But fundamentally, it's a story of helping to see them for who they are. Let me share with you one more piece here, another case. This is of a young man. Actually, I'm just going to go backwards here just for a second, just so you're not reading that wide. I want to set the story up for a second. Let me set it up for a second. It'll make more sense what you're about to read. Tony, about 15 years old, he's an African Nova Scotian kid. That's very significant to this story because his parents are both African Nova Scotian, middle class. When they were growing up, or as he was born, he's an only child, growing up, his parents wanted to give him an advantage in life, and they perceived that as basically moving him away from a community where there's a fairly high number of other black children, black families. And as the story that they tell, I'm trying to represent the story as they told it, they perceived that if they moved to one of the more predominantly white suburbs outside of Halifax, that their child would have a better education. Now, whether or not that's true or not, I'll defer to others to tell you about, but that was their perception. So what happens is Tony is growing up in this principle without, basically one of the few African Nova Scotian kids in this community, and there's a lot of racism in Nova Scotia. I won't go into that whole story, but you should know that. It's a very, very racially divided community there. And by the age of 8 years old, Tony comes home one day and says, Mom, Dad, what does the N-word mean? His parents are mortified that their child is being called the N-word at school. And of course, they advocate and talk to the school. It doesn't change much because the parents use the N-word at home. About age 10, Tony says, I'm fed up with being treated like this. Can I learn a martial art so I can defend myself? And they put him in judo. Judo's not a great martial art for defending yourself. I mean, maybe, but it's not like the best. He was thinking, kickboxing or taekwondo or cage wrestling or something like that. Anyway, so then by age of 12, Tony says, well, you bunch of adults are useless at helping me figure out how to provide some safety from racism, so I'm going to learn it myself. And what he does is he looks around the world and finds the perfect identity for a young black male in our society, and he adopts that gangster rapper persona. Tony is walking around the suburbs of Halifax, principally white, and he's got the chains and the bling and the pants and the swagger, and he's doing the whole, he's like LA Crew or 50 Cent or something like that, right? He's got the whole thing going, whatever that is. I don't follow that, but he tells me all about it. He shows it. And the reason I ended up working with him is Tony then fell into bringing weapons to school. He got into stealing money from drug dealers and a whole bunch of other non-sustainable activities. Anyways, he eventually is up on some sort of weapons offense, whatever, and his parents want to keep him out of the system as long as they can, of course, and they agree to take him on house arrest. And what's interesting is the judge in that case actually says that he should also get counseling, specifically for his anger management, because he's getting into fights. Now, this kid shows up in my clinic. I'm supposed to do anger management with a kid who's being racially dissed in his community. That's not ethical to my knowledge. What do you do? Do you seriously say to a kid who's being called the N-word at his school, what do? You say to him, okay, next time that happens, I just want you to watch your thoughts, and where that fits into your body, I want you to breathe. No, you want to tell the kid, just lay the ground, no, of course I didn't say that. I'm not allowed to say that. But that's my point, is that the context mattered. So let me just show you Tony's performance for me, and then I'll tell you how this all ended. So Waterville is our secure custody facility that he's avoided, but he's on house arrest for these weapons offenses and stuff like that. He was caught with a very large knife at one point, trying to be a badass in the community. So what does jail do for this kid? He says, well, I was bad at Waterville. I was so bored, so I'd get the other kids going and fighting and anything to keep it interesting. I was like the leader of the unit. You can get the identity going here, right? And then one morning they had this big ass team that threw on my light and came out down to my cell, and they were all there and the other kids were watching, and then bam, I'm down on the floor and cuffed. What had you done? Oh, they said I was instigating fights and muscling food, and they wanted me out of there. And then it was down to lockdown for 23 hours a day, and cold sandwiches, and a shit-ass toilet, and when someone else flushes their toilet, the shit comes into your toilet, and that's gross. Anyways, and then I said, wow, and I said, how long were you there? And he says, well, 31 days. And then I was discharged. But while I was in there, we would just all go buck nasty on each other, yelling through the grates, but like no contact. So if you didn't know that you were bad before, I said, you knew then. He says, oh yeah, there were cameras everywhere, and out in the yard there was razor wire, everything. So regrets? Oh fuck, no. Forget Waterville. Is he resilient? I think so.